following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. This week, I'm pleased to have as my guest Dan Baker, the Phillies public address announcer and a member of the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. Born in Philadelphia and raised in South Jersey, Dan grew up following all the Philadelphia sports teams. He started working for the Phils in 1972 and just completed his 46th season behind the mic, making him the longest tenured public address announcer in baseball. Dan also spent nearly 30 years as the Eagles PA announcer and has worked college basketball and college football games as well. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Dan, many sports writers, commentators, and play-by-play broadcasters enter the field because of a deep-seated love for their sport and an inability to compete at the higher levels of the game. I know that certainly was the case for me. What about you, though? I understand that you were an exceptional baseball and basketball player as a youngster, and then you went on to Glassboro State, now Rowan University, where you continue to play basketball. When and why did you switch to announcing?
Well, Bill, it may have come as a later realization for me than for some others in our profession, but I finally came to that realization that I wasn't good enough to play at the professional level, which from the time that I was a kid and was, pretty good in Little League baseball and later Camden County baseball and Garden State baseball and I made a lot of all-star teams but I played with some guys who went on to big league baseball, but it wasn't going to be me. But Bill, I started to think about, I was so enthralled by going to Connie Mack Stadium as a youth. I thought, wouldn't it be neat to be a part of this someday? Of course, initially thinking that as a player. But then when I realized that I wasn't good enough to make it as a player, I thought, in what other capacity could I perhaps find a role for myself? And I was always a pretty good speaker, and I loved sports, and I knew sports, and so that was my vehicle.
You're in baseball, but it seems from reading about your background that you were very talented in basketball. Was that a passion? Was that more of a passion than baseball for you when you were a kid, basketball?
No, I would say baseball was, and really it was my love of the Phillies that probably overrode everything else. But as a youthful athlete, I think baseball was probably my best sport. Basketball would have been second, and Bill, you probably give me more credit than I deserve. At Glassboro State, I played two years of junior varsity basketball. I was the captain of the JV team as a sophomore and suited varsity, but really did not distinguish myself at the varsity level. And my last 2 years, I probably would have been, maybe seventh or eighth man on the team, probably not a starter. But I had an opportunity to start in the mailroom at the UHF TV stations, which were just starting out in Philadelphia in the late 60s. You might remember Channel 17, Channel 29,
sure,
and Channel 48. And I got a job in the mailroom at the princely sum of $1.50 an hour at the old WKBS TV, Kaiser Broadcasting, WKBS TV, Channel 48 at 3201 South 26th Street. And from there went on to the engineering department, and then, my meeting with Stu Nahan and working with him, and that opened the door to many other opportunities.
Dan, who were your sportscasting role models growing up? We all have baseball role models and other sports role models, but who were your sportscasting role models?
Well, I love the Phillies announcers. I thought that Byram Som and Bill Campbell were terrific. And, you know, although initially when I realized I couldn't make it as a player, I thought maybe play-by-play would be the vehicle. I always had a deep admiration for the PA announcers. Dave Zinkoff of the Philadelphia Warriors, later the Philadelphia 76ers. Pete Byron of the Philadelphia Phillies. Matt Gukas Sr. of the Philadelphia Eagles. My predecessor, as you know, as the Eagles PA announcer. And I loved listening to Matt Gukas Sr. at Franklin Field. Tackle by Rosovich and Tom. You know, I'll never forget some of those calls. And, of course, the Eagles winning the NFL championship over the Packers in 1960. And I wasn't at the game, but I did listen to Bill Campbell on the radio play-by-play, and he was magnificent.
And then, of course, there was Zinkoff, Irving at the line, shooting two.
The University of Massachusetts, number 6, Julius Irving.
The soundtrack of my adolescence right there. I'm sure listeners will be interested to learn that after you graduated from Glassboro State in '68, you spent the next decade as a Philadelphia public school teacher coach. Now, I know you coached basketball. What did you teach?
Well, I was an elementary school teacher, Bill, and I taught in the 5th and 6th grade. It was mostly female teachers at that level, but I greatly enjoyed teaching there. I taught altogether for 12 years from 1968 to 1980 in the school district of Philadelphia. The first 10 years at the Landreth School, which was located at 23rd and Federal Streets. It's still there, but now it's a senior citizens complex. And when the Philadelphia School District closed Landreth in a cost-cutting move in 1978, I moved just a couple of blocks away to the Smith School at 19th and Wharton. By the way, I coached the 6th grade boys basketball team at Landreth for 8 years, and 7 of those years the kids were undefeated.
Wow.
And the star of the team, the biggest star, I had several terrific young kids, but Gene Banks is one whom you may have heard.
West Philly Speed Boys.
West Philadelphia, and then Duke.
Yep.
And then the Chicago Bulls and the Washington Bullets.
Wow. You began, as I said earlier, your sportscasting career part-time with the Phillies in 1972, and that was the year after the vet opened. Harry Callis had just been hired to do the play-by-play. Richie Ashburn was the analyst, and Bysom was also on the broadcast team. What was your relationship like with those folks? I mean, they're broadcasting the game. You're doing the public address announcing, but I'm sure you work closely together.
Yes, and I was very friendly with all of them, more so with Harry and Richie than with By. Not that I was unfriendly with By, just that By was nearing the end of his career, and of course Harry had just started with the Phillies a year before I did, in 1971, the first year at Veterans Stadium. Richie Ashburn was one of my idols growing up. My heroes were Robin Roberts and Richie Ashburn in baseball, Chuck Bednarik in football, Paul Arizin in basketball, later Wilt Chamberlain and Guy Rogers, and then Dick Allen and Johnny Callison, with those Phillies of the mid-'60s. Those were my sports heroes growing up.
Mm-hmm. I'd imagine that broadcasting is quite different from public address announcing. What have you found to be the challenges of PA announcing?
Well, the most important thing is to know how to pronounce everybody's name correctly. I make it a point to ask either the Phillies PR staff or the broadcasters, or in some cases, the manager or coaches or the player himself. And I really use the same formula with the visiting team, with whom I wouldn't be as familiar. Of course, I'm seeing the home team, 81 games a year. But I would ask, some of the visiting broadcasters or visiting PR people, or in some cases the manager or the coach or the player himself, and then I would write out the name phonetically, Bill, so that I knew exactly how to say it. But that's the most important thing as a PA announcer. I think I'm also, Bill, the only PA announcer who serves as an on-field host. I actually announce the starting lineups from right down on the field, from which I also introduce sponsors, people who are throwing out the first ball, and we have maybe an anthem singer or a band which is performing. So I do all of that. Bill Giles and Dave Montgomery always felt that it lent itself to a warmer presentation if the fans could actually associate a face with the voice, as opposed to some disembodied voice coming out of the loudspeaker system somewhere, not knowing what that person looked like. From the onset, Bill wanted me to kind of be an on-field host. And I think it's worked out very well, and I do think it connotes a certain warmth.
Oh, it does. It definitely does. I mean, people can relate with you much more when they see you interact rather than simply that voice coming over the public address system. The broadcasters have their own, their own favorite names. Callis used to do Mickey Morandini. And another name, this goes way back, that he used to really focus on was John Boccabella of the Montreal Expos. What are some of your favorite players? Who are some of your favorite players to announce?
Well, those are two of my favorites also. I think Harry's more well known for those pronunciations than me, of course, because Harry is more famous and so accomplished. What a great, great talent. But now batting for the Phillies, number 12, second baseman Mickey Morandini. I still love to say that name, as I do number 19, left fielder Greg Luzinski. Bill, it's the polysyllabic words, last names particularly, that lend themselves to a more melodic interpretation. And that's why they tend to be my favorite names to say, like Morandini and Boccabella. But over the years, I've enjoyed saying so many names, and, to be able to pronounce, those Phillies Hall of Famers like number 32, Steve Carlton. It's been, such a joy, and it gives me so much happiness to do, those games. In fact, I think, people would tell you who hear me and observe me firsthand that I have the same enthusiasm for making those announcements today as I did when I started 46 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And the voice hasn't changed all that much. It really Harry's got deeper as time went on, but your voice from what I remember is pretty much seemed to be consistent.
Well, Harry had a better voice than me. I think I have a good voice. I'm not selling myself short there, but Harry had this deep, resonant voice that may have also been mellowed by cigarette smoking. I don't know.
Right.
But I think mine has also deepened a little bit, but not to the resonance of a Harry Callis or a John Facenda. But one area where I do think that I excel is in emotion. I know, Bill, when to emote and when not to emote. The person, the PA announcer who screams and yells all the time is, to me, just as unprofessional as someone who, speaks in a monotone voice that never raises his voice. You need to know when to place emphasis. And there are times in the game when that's appropriate to do, and other times when it is not. And it's important to know the difference.
Dan, you've seen so many phenomenal Phillies games. Let's play highlight association. I'll give you the date of a Phillies highlight, and you give me your recollection, okay? Here we go. Steve Carlton's first season with the Phillies was 1972 when he went 27-10 and won the Cy Young Award.
Well, of course, that was also my first year with the Phillies, 1972. And, the Phillies weren't a very good team that year. It was their second year at the Vet. But every time Steve Carlton went to the mound, the Phillies had an excellent chance to win. Steve won almost half of the Phillies games that year. He was 27-10. I believe that the team won maybe 59 games. So, he almost won half. He was nothing short of brilliant. Pitched over 300 innings, had a fantastic earned run average. And every time Steve Carlton pitched, there was a big crowd on the stands, 30, 40,000. And I think there were even some occasions when there may have been as many as 50. Remember, Veterans Stadium, which was a dual-purpose stadium, home of both the Philadelphia Eagles of the NFL as well as Major League Baseball's Philadelphia Phillies, it could seat as many as 60,000 for baseball.
Right.
And Bill Giles, who did such a brilliant job, as executive vice president and with all of his promotions and marketing talents, nothing draws people to a game like a winning team. So anytime Carlton was on the mound, that was the best promotion, Bill, that the Phillies could have in 1972.
Wonderful season. I doubt we will ever see a pitching performance like that again. October 7th, 1977, the NLCS Game 3 against the Dodgers, which has gone down in Phillies annals as Black Friday.
Well, I'm very good friends with a couple of the stars of that game. As you may know, Bill, I have co-hosted for the last decade a radio show called The Bull Session, named in honor of the Bull. Number 19, left fielder Greg Luzinski, one of the greatest sluggers in Phillies history. And, of course, usually in the ninth inning of a game in which the Phillies were winning that year, Danny Ozark, Phillies manager, would substitute Jerry Martin, a superb defensive player. However, on this particular game, Danny left Greg in the game, and as you know, there was a long drive to the left field fence. It could have been the third out, but Greg was not quite able to catch it. He, collided with the left field fence. The ball dropped loose. Actually, I think he pinned it against the fence. In fact, Greg maintains it to this day that he caught it. It's amazing. There were 2 outs in that inning, 2 strikes, and I believe Lanny Moda laid down a bunt. If that ball goes foul, the Phillies win that game.
That's right.
But, one thing I will never forget, Bill, the Phillies, Gene Garber was pitching in his third inning in relief.
Mm-hmm.
The Phillies had outstanding relief pitching, certainly the best in baseball, with Tug McGraw, Ron Reed, and Gene Garber. And Gene was in his third inning, and they didn't score off of him in the seventh or the eighth. And he got the first two outs in the ninth when Moda laid down that bunt. And then after that, long fly ball dropped, and Davey Lopes hits a sharp ground ball that caroms off Mike Schmidt to Larry Boa, who spears it with his bare hand, his right hand, his throwing hand, in the shortstop hole between short and third, throws it in one motion to Richie Hebner at first, and just nips the base runner Davey Lopes. But the umpire, Bruce Fleming, called him safe.
And no replay back then, although the replay did show that he was out. Yes.
And, of course, Bruce Fleming always maintained, and Davey Lopes always maintained. Well, Davey Lopes used to say, Larry Boa would get on him and said, darn well you were out. He said, well, the umpire called me safe, And I like Larry Boa, and I like Davey Lopes a lot, who, as you know, Bill, later became an outstanding first base coach for the Phillies. Oh man, talk about a sad day. A lot of us still had 1964 in our memory banks, with that collapse with a 6.5 game lead with 12 to go. And then this, and of course the Dodgers went on to win it the next night when Tommy John beat Steve Carlton in the rain. Oh God, that went from what could have been one of the best days in Phillies baseball history to one of the worst.
I still believe that out of that first glory era, which would have run from 1976 with the first Eastern Division Championship through 1983 with the second pennant of that run, that 1977 team was the best of all those teams. They had every facet of the game down. We had starting pitching, we had relief pitching, we had great defense, we had great offense, we had base run, we had everything. We even had a bench, and we just couldn't go over the top, make it over the top. But we did. I'm sorry.
A lot of the players on that team feel the same way you did. Even though they won it all in 1980, beating the Kansas City Royals, a lot of the same players on the 1977 team felt that team was more talented, but for one reason or another, they didn't win it. But these circumstances we just talked about on that October 7th, 1977 Black Friday game, But in 1980, they were able to take it all, and of course they had Dallas Green then as manager, and finally after 97 years, the Phillies had their first ever World Series championship.
What do you remember about that day, October 21st, 1980, when the Phillies finally clinched that first World Series title? What were the images that stood out the most for you?
Pete Rose catching that foul ball that caromed off Bob Boone's glove. Tug McGraw's strikeout of Willie Wilson. The police dogs surrounding the field. Horses. The Philadelphia policemen maintaining order, which they did. And the happiness that pervaded the entire city, but certainly all around the ballpark, such joy. It exorcised, the demons that all these years, the Phillies, let's face it, they won the pennant in 1915, and after winning the first game, lost, I think, 4 straight games by 1 run to the Red Sox. In 1950, that wonderful Whiz Kids team lost in 4 straight to the Yankees. 3 of them were by 1 run. So, I mean, they were very competitive in both of those World Series. But since the Phillies' founding in 1883 up until 1980, they had not won a World Series. 97 years of futility. And as you know, Bill, being the historian that you are, I mean, there were many years, following beginning around, 1918 to like 1948. In that 30-year period, I think the Phillies had like 2 winning seasons, and they had a number of 100-loss years, in the 40s.
Mm-hmm. Here's one that I remember very, very well because I was there for it. I was in the nosebleeds. July 1st, 1985, you announce then first baseman Mike Schmidt's name in the pregame introductions, and he ran out to first base wearing a wig and sunglasses. Do you remember the circumstances surrounding that?
I sure do. He was just interviewed in Montreal on the Phillies' previous road trip, and he said some disparaging things about Veterans Stadium. And I think people told him, our PR staff, probably Larry Shank and Chris Wheeler, hey, Mike, you got to be careful. People take that personally. You can't, be so critical. But Mike, was a pretty straight shooter, and there probably are some things that you shouldn't say, but he spoke his mind, and there he is, the greatest player in Phillies history, and what a stroke of genius. That was like a Larry Anderson type of thing to do, to wear a disguise. But I think the fans were ready to serenade him negatively, with a lot of boos, and he completely disarmed them, Phil, when he came out with those sunglasses and that wig.
Well, I remember that game so well because Mike Schmidt was one of my boyhood heroes, and I went down to the vet with my nice white and red pinstripe Mike Schmidt jersey on to give some moral support to my hero, and I went to the concession stand, get myself a couple dogs, a Coke, and I'm walking to my seats, and I just feel this pelting up against my back. Some fans had thrown those little white containers filled with ketchup against my jersey.
My gosh.
And let me tell you, I still have that ketchup-stained jersey. Never wear it, of course. Couldn't get the stains out of it. But I went up into my seats in the nosebleeds, and you're right. I mean, you could actually feel, you could just feel the kind of impending explosion that was going to come before you announced Mike's name. And then it was the strangest feeling because people started to book, and then it just stopped. Like, who is that guy out there? Who is that guy? And all of a sudden, everybody started clapping, and he completely disarmed the fans. It was, I think, one of his greatest moments of triumph of his career. It really was. October 20th, 1993, Game 4 of the World Series, a rain-drenched affair ending in a 15-14 Phillies loss to the Toronto Blue Jays in a game many people said broke the Phillies back. Had they won it, they probably would have won the series.
I agree with that. And a couple of things that stand out most in my mind about that game. If you recall, the Phillies took an early lead. Toronto came back. The Phillies scored. And the Phillies had a big lead. Of course, it was also a rainy night. the Phillies were leading, as I recall, by about four runs, maybe 5 runs, bases loaded, 1 out, Darren Daulton batting. Darren hits a tremendous shot to right field that just goes foul. And then he ends up, it would have been a grand slam home run. And it would have given the Phillies an 8-run, 9-run lead. And I think the game would have been over. And I think the series would have been over. But as it happened, the ball just went foul. And then Darren had a long fly to right, a sacrifice fly, and it was the second out. The Phillies scored 1 run, and then the third out was made. But that long foul ball by Daulton, had that been fair and been a grand slam home run, I think the Phillies win. I was stunned that the Blue Jays came back. And, as great of a World Series and as great of a postseason as Lenny Dykstra had that year in the NLCS against the Braves and then later against the Blue Jays, I'll never forget, a ball in the 8th inning when the Blue Jays were coming back that I thought number 4 should have caught. But, he for some reason, of course, again, it was wet. Maybe he was afraid of slipping. Maybe he didn't quite see it. But didn't land all that far from him. But he was circumspect in the way that he went after that ball. And Lenny just had a brilliant year. One of the best leadoff seasons that any leadoff hitter ever had in baseball history. But I did feel that Lenny, was not at his best defensively in that game, and that didn't help matters. And then, of course, there was definitely the sense that when the Phillies lost that game, blowing a big lead at home and basically giving up home field advantage, that maybe they weren't going to win this World Series.
Yeah. Dykstra was such did so well in the postseason with the Mets and the Phillies. I mean, he really seemed to be able to hit home runs at will. And that game was one of them. Just a tremendous player. Of course, Schilling won Game 5, and then they went up to Toronto and lost the series up there.
Well, I was there. I was sitting in lower right field between first base and the right field foul pole, just to the right of the Phillies dugout, with a lot of other Phillies full-time employees who were sitting down there. And, we saw that home run. I can tell you this. We came back on the Phillies charter. The Phillies thought to a man if they won that game, they were going to win the next day when Schilling would have pitched again in the 7th and deciding game. Right. And they had that lead going into the 9th. It's just unfortunate. I also thought in that game, I'm trying to remember the middle infielder who actually struck out, but made it seem like a foul ball. I'm trying to think of the pitcher, the tall pitcher, that was
our pitcher.
Yes,
Roger Mason.
Roger Mason. Yes, and Larry Anderson. Right. And the Blue Jays were able to lengthen that 8th inning, and then that gave an opportunity for the top of the order to come to bat, in the 9th when, they won that game. But the Phillies were very optimistic that if they could have won that game, they would have won Game 7.
October 29th, 2008. Game 6 of the World Series against the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, although it was anticlimactic because if you remember, This was the first World Series that was postponed. The Game 6 had to be postponed, I guess, because of rain. On a Monday, the rain was so bad, Tuesday was taken off. The game was resumed, I think, in the 6th inning on Wednesday, October 29th. And do you remember the Philly who hit the double for the first hit of that resumed game?
Left-hander. I forget his name. Outfielder.
How about that, Jeff Jenkins?
Jeff Jenkins, yes. And I was so happy for him, and I was so upset, with the first part of that game, when the umpires allowed the Blue Jays to bat and tie the game, like in the top of the 6th. It was the weather was just awful, and my feeling was, wait a minute, let the Phillies have a chance to bat in that kind of weather. In the bottom, of course, by the bottom of the 6th, it was just even if it could be worse, and I don't know if it could have been much worse. It was just foul. But my feeling was, I don't. It's amazing that the Blue Jays. It's amazing that Tampa Bay didn't go ahead in the top of the 6th. There was a ball caught in center field that could very well have allowed another a lead run, a go-ahead run to score for Tampa. But Shane Victorino came up with it. You think it reminded me of the joy of 1980 when the Phillies beat the Kansas City Royals to win their first ever World Series. And then when that game was resumed on the date to which you're referring, and the Phillies were able to win that, oh my goodness. Just the unbridled joy in Philadelphia, the parade that followed, coming out on the field. I had a chance to interview some of the players down on the field and on the PA system, so the fans could enjoy that. And it was just a great, great moment in Phillies history and Philadelphia sports history.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate that the 2 World Series were won at home.
Yes.
That doesn't happen to all teams. So we've been very fortunate with that. I got one more for you, Dan.
Okay.
This is kind of a sad one because of Roy Halladay's passing. But October 6th, 2010, Halladay throws a 4-0 no-hit win against the Cincinnati Reds in Game 1 of the NLDS. What do you remember about that night?
Well, as you know, he threw a perfect game in the regular season that year against the Marlins in Miami.
Right.
And then to come back, and that was only the second no-hitter in Major League Baseball postseason, following Don Larson's perfect game, when the Yankees beat the Dodgers, I guess, in '56. Mm-hmm. He was just unbelievable. And on the last out of the game where the ball is dribbled in front of home plate, the bat's right there. The ball could have hit the bat and carom somewhere. I think it was Brandon Phillips maybe that hit that. But Carlos Ruiz, cool as a cucumber, goes out, gets down on both knees, picks up the ball, and guns it to first, and there's the out. And my goodness, I thought, from there the Phillies were going to go on, to return to the World Series, and it's unfortunate, that they couldn't. But when you think of brilliance in the postseason and Phillies' brilliance in the postseason, it doesn't get any better than that Roy Halladay no-hitter against Cincinnati.
He was such a class act, too. That was his Cy Young Award-winning year, and he had a Cy Young Award plaque made for Chooch, and he gave it to him. He always credited his teammates, always, diverted the attention from himself and to his teammates. I was very, very sad because I watched in 2011 when we lost the NLDS to the St. Louis Cardinals. I was looking to see Roy Halladay's expression in the dugout, and I just knew, I think as many Philly fans did, after Ryan Howard went down and blew that Achilles out, that was it. That was it, and that was, and I think Halladay knew that was his last chance really to get a World Series ring, make that even an NLCS ring.
And if you recall, Bill, in that game, Raul Ibanez hit a long drive to right field that was caught at the wall, and there were two people on base. And if that ball had been a couple of feet longer, that would have been a 3-run home run, which would have lifted the Phillies to a victory. And also, in the ninth inning, Chase Utley hit a ball to the wall in deepest right center, and that was caught right at the wall. And those are about as hard hit balls as we had the whole night against Carpenter. And Halladay, after giving up that first inning run, really battled and was brilliant again, for the rest of the game, but it wasn't to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one of my regrets, that we were not able to bring one home for Roy Halladay. What are you doing these days? I know that you're during the off season. You're over there at Broad Street Live during Eagles games.
Xfinity Live.
Xfinity Live.
Of course, this Saturday, I'll be announcing my 11th Army-Navy football classic at Lincoln Financial Field. And then on Sunday, I'll be at Xfinity Live. And as I think you and some of the fans know, many of the fans would probably know, I did the public address announcing for the Eagles for 29 years and actually kept the statistics and spotted for a lot of the visiting announcers and network announcers prior to doing the PA announcing for the Eagles, which I did from 1985 through 2013. But the nice folks at Xfinity Live were nice enough to hire me, and for the last 3 years, I've been announcing all of the Eagles games home and away at Xfinity Live, where they have inside there, they have like 5 different restaurants, and they have a large 32-foot LED screen, which is the largest screen on the East Coast outside of a stadium or an arena, and they show the Eagles games up on that big screen, and you hear the audio of the telecast, but I will talk over that and make some of the same signature announcements that I did when I was the Eagles PA announcer for 29 years. That's another Eagles first down. And I'll announce the scores and, defensive plays, and we do Eagles trivia, and they get thousands and thousands of fans for Eagles games there. There's this phenomenon, Bill, where, of course, every Eagles game is sold out, 70,000 at Lincoln Financial Field. Then you have a backlog of 50,000 who would like to purchase season tickets, and they're on a list in case one becomes available. But many people who don't have tickets will tailgate in the parking lots that surround Lincoln Financial Field and Citizens Bank Park and the Wells Fargo Center. Then they don't have tickets for the game. So they'll either stay at their cars and watch the game on TV, listen on the radio, and, have plenty to eat and drink. But now a lot of them will come inside to Xfinity Live and join us, and they can, watch the game inside and, have great views on TV. And again, we have some women who are the Xfinity Live cheerleaders, and they cheer and dance, and we have a DJ, a great DJ, and there's a lot of fun going on the inside, and it gives you that feel. It's as close as you can be to feeling that in stadium atmosphere without actually being at Lincoln Financial Field itself.
So, listeners, if you're not going to be out in L.A. on Sunday at 4:30, the next best place to be is Xfinity Live. Dan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Bill. Enjoyed being with you.
And thank you, Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.